There are stories we tell about rescue stories filled with urgency and drama, with racing hearts and last-minute saves, but this is not one of those stories. This is a story about waiting. It's about a dog who grew old in the margins, who learned that love does not always arrive on time. It's about the quiet dignity of those who are passed over day after day, while younger faces find families and the shelter doors swing open for everyone but them. This is the story of the senior dog, a gentle soul with graying fur and tired eyes who spent her days watching the world move forward without her. She had no name that mattered, no past that anyone remembered, no future that anyone promised. And it's the story of a woman, herself growing older, who had learned the same hard truth, that the world often looks past those it no longer considers new. But sometimes, in the slowest, quietest moments, two lives find each other, not because they were chosen quickly, but because they understood what it meant to wait. This is not a story about being saved in an instant. It's about being seen after a long silence. It's about the kind of love that doesn't need to be young to be real. So settle in. Let the music play softly, and let me tell you about a dog and a woman who saved each other, not with grand gestures, but with the simple, steady comfort of being needed, because some of the most beautiful rescues happen long after everyone else has stopped looking. She had been waiting for a very long time. Not the kind of waiting that comes with hope, not anymore. That had faded somewhere between the second week and the second month, dissolved into the rhythm of morning footsteps and evening silence, into the sound of gates opening for other dogs and closing again before they reached her. She was old. That much was clear to anyone who looked. Her muzzle had gone silver first, then the fur around her eyes, spreading like frost across her face until even her ears carried streaks of white. Her body had softened with age, her movements slower, more deliberate. She no longer leapt at the front of her kennel when visitors passed. She no longer barked with the bright, desperate urgency of the younger dogs. She simply lay down and waited. The shelter was not unkind. The staff spoke to her gently when they passed, refilled her water bowl with care, placed her meals at the same time each day. But kindness, she had learned, was not the same as choosing. Kindness was what you gave to those you pitied. Choosing was something else entirely, and she had not been chosen. Not when the family with two young children walked past, their eyes scanning for energy and play. Not when the couple in matching jackets paused at her gate, smiled softly, and moved on to the puppy 3 kennels down. Not when the man with the gray beard stopped, looked at her for a long moment, and shook his head as if apologizing for something he couldn't quite name. She did not blame them. She understood, in the quiet way that old souls understand, that the world wanted youth. It wanted beginnings, not endings. It wanted the promise of years ahead, not the reminder of years already gone. So she waited. The mornings came with the sound of boots on concrete, the metallic clang of gates being unlatched, the scatter of kibble into metal bowls. The afternoons stretched long and golden through the high windows, dust motes drifting in the light, the air thick with the smell of disinfectant and hay and the faint, sweet must of too many animals in too small a space. Evenings were quieter. The shelter emptied of visitors. The staff moved more slowly, their voices softer, their tasks winding down. The dogs who had been adopted that day were gone, leaving behind empty kennels that would be filled again by morning. And she would lie on her blanket then, faded, but hers, and close her eyes, and let the sounds wash over her like water. She had learned not to hope. Hope was exhausting. Hope made the waiting harder, but she had not learned not to notice. She noticed when a new dog arrived, wild-eyed and trembling, and how the staff would kneel beside the kennel and speak in low, soothing tones until the trembling stopped. She noticed when the old retriever 2 rows over finally stopped eating, and how gently they carried him out, wrapped in a blanket, his tail still now. She noticed the way the light changed with the seasons, golden in summer, pale and thin in winter, and how the concrete beneath her grew cold as the months turned. And she noticed the people, the ones who came looking for something specific: a hunting dog, a jogging companion, a puppy small enough to carry. The ones who came with children, with lists, with excitement that filled the air like static. The ones who walked slowly, thoughtfully, as if searching for something they couldn't quite name. She watched them all, and she waited. Because what else was there to do? The shelter had routines, and she had learned them all. Morning meant food. Midday meant the volunteers, the ones who walked the younger dogs and tossed tennis balls in the yard and returned smelling of grass and sunshine. Afternoon meant cleaning, the hiss of hoses and the sharp scent of bleach. Evening meant stillness, and night meant the sounds of breathing, the occasional whimper, the soft shuffle of paws on concrete as another dog resettled in sleep. Night meant darkness, and in the darkness she could almost forget where she was. Almost. But morning always came, and with it, the waiting began again. She was not unhappy, exactly. Unhappiness required expectation. She had learned slowly to live without it, to find small comforts in the cool water in her bowl, the patch of sunlight that fell across her kennel at 3 in the afternoon, the scratch behind her ears from the woman with the kind eyes who came every Tuesday. Small things, quiet things, the kinds of things you notice when time moves slowly, and time for her moved very slowly indeed. Some of the other dogs had been there longer, some had been there only days, but none of them, she thought, had learned to wait quite the way she had. None of them had learned to make peace with it. She had. Or so she told herself. But on certain days, when the light was especially warm, or when a visitor lingered at her gate just a moment longer than the others, something old and tired stirred inside her chest, something that felt, just barely, like hope. She did not let it stay. Hope was dangerous. Hope made you believe that someone might see you, that someone might choose you, that your waiting might, one day, end. And she had been waiting for a very long time. But the world outside the shelter moved on, as it always did, and inside the days blurred together, one into the next, indistinguishable and slow. And still she waited. She had not always been here. Once, a long time ago, there had been a house, a yard, a voice that called her name, a name she could no longer quite remember, though the sound of it sometimes echoed faintly in her dreams. There had been a porch. She remembered that. Wooden slats warm beneath her belly, the smell of cut grass in summer evenings, the low hum of cicadas in the trees. She had been younger then, faster. Her coat had been darker, her eyes brighter. She had run without thinking, without the stiffness that now settled into her hips on cold mornings. She had belonged to someone, but that was before the house had emptied, before the voice had stopped calling, before the car had pulled away and not come back. She did not know why. Dogs rarely do. She knew only that one day, everything had changed. The porch had been replaced by pavement, the voice by silence, the yard by a kennel with chain-link walls and a concrete floor. She had been brought here by a man in a uniform who smelled of coffee and cologne. He had spoken gently, his hand steady on her collar, as he led her through the double doors and down the long hallway that smelled of dogs and fear and industrial soap. He had told the woman at the desk that she was a good dog, that she deserved better, that someone would want her. But no one had. Not yet. At first, she had believed him. She had stood at the front of her kennel, tail wagging tentatively, eyes hopeful. She had greeted every visitor with quiet enthusiasm, had sat politely when asked, had leaned into hands that reached through the gate to scratch her ears. She had tried, but weeks became months, and months became something harder to count, and slowly, carefully, she had learned to stop trying quite so hard. The shelter was full of stories like hers, dogs who had been left behind, dogs who had been found wandering, dogs whose owners had died or moved or simply decided they no longer fit into the life they were building. She heard their stories in fragments, snippets of conversation between staff members, notes clipped to kennel doors, the quiet murmurs of volunteers who paused to read them. Owner, passed away, family couldn't keep her, found on Highway 40, no chip, surrendered due to housing, very sweet, needs a quiet home. Each story was different, but the ending was always the same. They waited, and waiting, she had learned, was something you did alone. The younger dogs did not understand this yet. They still believed that the next person who walked past might be the one. They barked, they spun, they pressed their noses to the chain link and whined with a kind of frantic optimism that exhausted her just to watch. She had been like that once. She remembered, but she had learned, as all old things learn, That energy spent hoping was energy wasted. Better to save it. Better to rest. Better to accept that some stories moved slowly, and some did not move at all. The staff knew her by name now, not the name she'd had before that was gone, lost in the paperwork or the memory of whoever had brought her here, but the name they had given her. Daisy. She did not feel like a daisy. Daisies were bright and cheerful, small and delicate. She was none of those things, but she answered to it because it was the only name she had. The woman with the kind eyes, her name was Mary, always stopped at her kennel on Tuesdays. She would kneel down, press her fingers through the chain link, and speak in the low, steady voice that some people use when they mean what they say. "You're still here, sweet girl. I know, I know." Mary did not make promises. She did not say that someone would come for her soon, that it was only a matter of time, that everything would be okay. She simply acknowledged the waiting, and somehow that was better, because Daisy knew the truth. She had heard it in the conversations the staff did not think she could understand. She's too old. People want puppies. Even if they don't want puppies, they want young dogs. 3, 4 years old max. She's what, 9? 10. That's a tough sell. I know, but she's so gentle. Someone will see that. Maybe, but it's been 4 months. 4 months. Daisy did not count in months. She counted in mornings, in bowls of kibble, in the number of times the sun had crossed her kennel floor. But she understood what 4 months meant. It meant she had been here long enough that people had stopped expecting her to leave. It meant she was becoming permanent. And permanence, in a shelter, was not a kindness. She had seen it happen to others. The dog who had been there so long that the staff no longer mentioned him to visitors. The cat in the corner whose kennel card had faded and curled at the edges. The rabbit whose cage had been moved to the back room out of sight because no one asked about rabbits anymore. Permanence meant being forgotten. But Daisy was not forgotten. Not entirely. The staff still cleaned her kennel, still filled her bowls, still paused to murmur her name when they passed. She was not forgotten. She was simply not chosen. And there was a difference. At night, when the shelter grew quiet and the fluorescent lights dimmed to a faint humming glow, Daisy would lie on her blanket and think about the house she no longer quite remembered. She would think about the porch, the yard, the voice that had once called her name. She wondered if that person had thought of her. If they had looked back as the car pulled away, if they had said her name one last time. She wondered if it mattered. Probably not. What mattered now was this: the kennel, the routine, the waiting, the small, quiet comforts she had learned to find in the slowness of each day. What mattered now was surviving the waiting with dignity. And Daisy, for all her age and weariness, still had that. She still lifted her head when someone approached, still wagged her tail just a little when Mary knelt at her gate, still ate her meals, drank her water, settled into sleep with the kind of grace that comes only to those who have learned to accept what cannot be changed. She was old, she was overlooked, she was waiting, but she was still here. And for now, that was enough. The woman arrived on a Thursday. Daisy did not know it was Thursday, of course. Days had no names for her, only rhythms. But later the staff would mention it in passing, and the detail would stick in the story the way small details sometimes do. Thursday. Late morning. The light pale and cool through the high windows. The woman moved slowly. That was the first thing Daisy noticed. Not the hurried, purposeful stride of someone on a mission. Not the excited bounce of children dragging parents toward the puppy kennels. Not the cautious hesitation of someone unsure if they were ready. Just slow, steady, deliberate. She was older, perhaps 70, perhaps more. Her hair was white and pulled back in a soft bun. She wore a cardigan the color of faded lavender, sensible shoes, and carried a purse over one shoulder that looked as though it had been with her for many years. She walked the length of the kennels without stopping. Past the young shepherd mix who barked and spun. Past the terrier who yapped relentlessly. Past the hound who bayed and pressed his nose to the gate. Daisy watched her pass. Watched the way she looked at each dog. not with pity, but with something quieter. Something like recognition. And Ben, the woman, stopped. Not at Daisy's kennel. Not yet. But close. 2 kennels down, where an elderly beagle lay curled in the corner, his breathing slow and labored. The woman stood there for a long time. Long enough that one of the staff members, a young man named Ben, approached and asked if she needed help. "Just looking," the woman said. Her voice was soft, a little hoarse, as though she did not use it often. "That's Charlie," Ben said, nodding toward the beagle. "He's been with us about 6 months. He's got some health issues, arthritis, a heart murmur, but he's sweet, real sweet." The woman nodded. She did not ask questions. She simply looked. And then, after another long moment, she moved on. She passed the kennels slowly, one by one, pausing at each, reading the cards clipped to the gates. Name, age, breed, notes, good with kids, needs experienced owner, high energy, calm, quiet, prefers adults. When she reached Daisy's kennel, she stopped. Daisy did not move. She had learned not to. Movement could be interpreted as desperation, and desperation, she had learned, made people uncomfortable. So she stayed where she was, lying on her blanket, head resting on her paws, eyes open but calm. The woman looked at her for a long time. Then she knelt down. It was not an easy thing for her. Daisy could see that. The woman's knees creaked as she lowered herself, one hand braced against the chain link for balance. But she did it anyway. She knelt until she was level with Daisy's eyes. And she smiled. Not a big smile. Not the kind people gave to puppies. Just a small, sad, knowing smile. The kind of smile that said, "I see you. I know what this is." "Hello," the woman said softly. Daisy's tail twitched. Just once. Just barely. The woman reached her fingers through the gate. Slowly. No sudden movements. No excitement. No excitement. Just a quiet offering. Daisy lifted her head. Sniffed the fingers. They smelled of soap and hand cream. And something faintly floral. They smelled kind. She leaned forward, just a little, and let the woman scratch behind her ears. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The woman knelt. Daisy leaned into the touch. The shelter hummed around them, dogs, barking, gates clanging, voices calling, but in that small, quiet space, there was stillness. "What's her name?" the woman asked. Ben had returned, clipboard in hand. "That's Daisy. She's been with us about 4 months. She's 10, maybe 11. We're not totally sure. She was surrendered after her owner passed away." The woman nodded. She did not ask if Daisy was good with kids or high energy or needed training. She simply said, "She's beautiful." Ben smiled. "She is. Real calm. Real gentle. Just older. So people tend to pass her by." "I know the feeling," the woman said quietly. She stayed there for a while longer, her fingers still scratching gently behind Daisy's ears. And Daisy, who had learned not to hope, felt something small and fragile stir in her chest. But then the woman stood. Slowly, carefully, one hand on the gate to steady herself. "Thank you," she said to Ben. And she walked away. Daisy watched her go, watched the lavender cardigan disappear down the hallway, past the barking dogs and the bright fluorescent lights, and out through the double doors at the end. And then the woman was gone. Daisy lay back down. She did not whine. She did not scratch at the gate. She simply settled onto her blanket, closed her eyes, and let the small, fragile hope dissolve back into the quiet rhythm of waiting. Because that was what she did. She waited, and she was very good at it. But something had shifted. She did not know what, did not know if it mattered. But the woman's fingers had been kind. Her voice had been soft. Her smile had been sad and real. And Daisy thought just for a moment that perhaps the woman understood what it meant to be passed over, to be looked at and not chosen, to be old in a world that wanted youth. Perhaps. Or perhaps she was simply another visitor, another kind face, another moment that would fade into the background of days indistinguishable from one another. It did not matter. Daisy closed her eyes. The shelter hummed around her. Somewhere, a dog barked. Somewhere, a gate clanged shut. Somewhere, footsteps echoed on concrete. And she waited. Because that was all there was to do. The woman did not return the next day, or the day after that. Daisy had not expected her to. Expecting things, hoping for things, was a habit she had long since broken. So when the double doors opened each morning and the stream of visitors began, she did not lift her head to search for a lavender cardigan. She simply lay still and watched the world move past her. And it did move past her. Every day. Families came with children who squealed and pointed at the puppies. Young couples came holding hands looking for a jogging partner or a hiking companion. Single men and women came looking for something specific, small, large, energetic, calm, and Daisy was rarely what they were looking for. Too old, she heard it sometimes, whispered between people who thought the dogs could not understand. She's sweet, but she's too old. We want something that'll be with us for a while. How long do dogs her age usually live? I don't know, maybe 2, 3 years? That's not very long. No, it's not. And they would move on to the younger dogs, the ones with years ahead of them, the ones who could grow with a family, learn new tricks, run in the park without tiring, live long enough to become part of the story. Daisy was not part of anyone's story, not anymore. She had been once. She remembered that, but that story had ended. And this one, the one where she waited in the kennel and watched people pass, was not the kind of story people wanted to step into. So she waited. And she watched. The young shepherd mix was adopted on a Monday. A tall man with kind eyes and a firm handshake had knelt beside the kennel, and the dog had leapt and spun and licked his face through the chain link, and the man had laughed and said, "This one, definitely this one." And just like that, the kennel was empty. The terrier was adopted on a Wednesday. A woman with 2 children who could barely contain their excitement had filled out the paperwork while the dog yapped and bounced and wagged his tail so hard his whole body shook. The hound was adopted on a Friday. An older man, not as old as the woman in the lavender cardigan, but older than most, had stood at the kennel for a long time, just looking, and then he had nodded, as if making a decision he had been putting off, and said, "I'll take him." And one by one, the kennels emptied and filled again. New dogs arrived, frightened, confused, barking or silent or trembling. The staff would soothe them, settle them, clip new cards to their gates, and the cycle would begin again. But Daisy remained. She had been there longer than most of the dogs in her row, longer than the retriever who had arrived last week, longer than the pit bull who had come in scared and left happy, longer than almost anyone except Charlie, the old beagle 2 kennels down, and a 3-legged shepherd named Max in the back row. They were the long-timers, the ones people walked past without stopping, the ones who had learned to lie still and not waste energy hoping. Sometimes, late at night, Daisy wondered what would happen to them. To her, to Charlie, to Max. Would they stay here forever? Would they grow so old that one day the staff would come with gentle hands and soft voices and carry them out wrapped in blankets, the way they had carried the old retriever who had stopped eating? She did not know. And in a way, it did not matter, because she could not change it, could not make herself younger, more energetic, more appealing, could not make people see her the way they saw the puppies. All she could do was wait, and be kind to the people who were kind to her. Mary still came every Tuesday. She still knelt at Daisy's kennel, still reached through the gate to scratch behind her ears, still spoke in that low, steady voice that made Daisy feel, just for a moment, as though she mattered. "Still here, sweet girl," Mary would say. I know. And Daisy would lean into her hand, close her eyes, and let the kindness settle over her like a blanket. Ben, the young staff member, always paused when he passed her kennel. He would top off her water bowl even if it was still full, adjust her blanket even if it was already straight, murmur her name even as she was sleeping. "You're a good girl, Daisy. Someone's going to see that. I know they will." But weeks passed and no one did. People looked. People smiled. People sometimes reached through the gate to pet her. But they did not choose her, and Daisy had learned to accept that. Acceptance was not the same as happiness. It was quieter. sadder, but also, in a strange way, easier. Because acceptance meant she no longer had to hope, no longer had to believe that the next person might be the one. She could simply exist, one day at a time, one bowl of kibble, one patch of sunlight, one scratch behind the ears. Small things, quiet things, the kinds of things that sustained you when nothing else did. On the days when the shelter was busy weekends, mostly Daisy would lie at the back of her kennel and let the noise wash over her, the barking, the laughter, the excited voices of children, the soft murmurs of couples debating which dog to take home. She did not mind the noise. It was better than silence. Silence meant no one was coming. Noise meant possibility, even if that possibility was never for her. And so the days continued. Morning, afternoon, evening, night, the same rhythm, the same waiting, until one Thursday 3 weeks after the woman in the lavender cardigan had first appeared. The double doors opened and she walked in again. Daisy did not see her at first. She was lying with her back to the hallway, her head resting on her paws, half asleep in the pale afternoon light. But she heard the footsteps, slow, steady, deliberate, and she heard them stop, right outside her kennel. Daisy lifted her head. The woman was there, the same lavender cardigan, the same soft bun of white hair, the same quiet, thoughtful expression. She was looking at Daisy. At this time, she did not walk away. The woman came back the next day, and the day after that. At first, she did not ask to take Daisy out. She simply stood at the kennel, sometimes for 5 minutes, sometimes for 20, and looked at her. Not in the way people looked at puppies with excitement and energy and plans already forming, but in the way someone might look at an old photograph, with quiet recognition and something close to grief. On the third visit, she knelt again, slowly, carefully, one hand on the chain link for balance, and she spoke. "I had a dog once," she said. Her voice was soft, almost as if she were speaking to herself. "A long time ago. She looked a little like you." Daisy's ears twitched. She did not move, but she listened. "She got old," the woman continued. "The way all things do, and I thought I couldn't do it again. Couldn't watch another one grow old. Couldn't say goodbye again." The woman's fingers slipped through the gate. Daisy leaned forward, let her scratch behind her ears. "But I've been thinking," the woman said quietly. "Maybe that's not the point. Maybe the point is just being there, for however long there is." She stayed for a while longer. Then she stood, nodded to Ben as he passed, and left. But she came back. Every Thursday, every Saturday, sometimes on Tuesdays when Mary was there, and the two women would exchange quiet greetings and kind smiles. "You're thinking about her," Mary said one Tuesday. Not as a question, but as a statement. The woman nodded. "I am. She's a good dog." "I know. She's been here a long time." "I know that too." Mary smiled. "Then what are you waiting for?" The woman looked at Daisy, her expression unreadable. "I'm not sure," she said. "Maybe just making sure." "Making sure of what?" "That I'm ready." Mary nodded. She understood, because readiness when it came to love was never simple. It was never about logic or timing or practicality. It was about something quieter, something that could not be rushed. And so the woman kept coming, and Daisy kept waiting. But the waiting felt different now, less heavy, less endless, because the woman's visits had become part of the rhythm, part of the routine, part of the small, quiet comforts that made each day bearable. The woman would arrive in the late morning carrying her purse, wearing her lavender cardigan, moving slowly down the hallway until she reached Daisy's kennel. Saturday, the same, and sometimes, in between, on days when Daisy had stopped expecting her, the double doors would open and there she would be. The staff noticed. Of course they did. "I think she's going to take her," Ben said one afternoon, watching the woman kneel at Daisy's kennel. Mary nodded. "I think so too. But she's been coming for weeks. Why doesn't she just decide?" Mary smiled. "Because deciding to love something old is harder than deciding to love something young. You have to make peace with the ending before you can enjoy the beginning. Ben did not fully understand, but he nodded anyway, and the woman kept coming. One Saturday, she brought a blanket, soft fleece, the color of pale blue sky. She asked Ben if she could give it to Daisy, and he said yes, and she folded it carefully and placed it in the kennel, smoothing it out with her hands. Daisy sniffed it. It smelled clean, unfamiliar, but kind. She lay down on it, and the woman smiled. Another visit, the woman brought a toy. Not a loud squeaky thing meant for puppies, just a simple, soft fabric bone, worn and faded, as if it had been loved before. Daisy did not play with it. She was too old for playing, but she rested her chin on it, and the woman seemed satisfied with that. She's preparing, Mary said to Ben one afternoon, watching the woman sit on the floor outside Daisy's kennel, her back against the wall, her eyes closed, just being there. Preparing for what? To take her home. How do you know? Because that's what love looks like, Mary said. When you're ready, you start making space for it. And slowly, quietly, the woman was making space. She asked Ben about Daisy's diet. What she ate, how much, what time. She asked about her health. Any issues? Any medications? Anything she should know? She asked about her temperament. Was she good with other dogs? With cats? Did she like car rides? Did she sleep through the night? Ben answered every question patiently, thoroughly, and with hope rising in his chest. And still, the woman did not decide. Not yet. Because deciding, really deciding, was not something she could rush. It was not something she could force. It was something that had to settle into her bones, into her heart, until it felt less like a choice and more like an inevitability. And so she kept coming, and Daisy kept waiting. But the waiting no longer felt lonely, because for the first time in a long time, Daisy was being seen. Not as a kennel number, not as an old dog no one wanted, but as herself, as Daisy, and that, she thought, was something. The weeks turned. The shelter's rhythm continued. Dogs came and went. Kennels emptied and filled. The seasons began to shift, summer fading into the pale golden light of early autumn. And through it all, the woman kept coming, until one Thursday, nearly 2 months after her first visit, she arrived with a leash in her hand. Not looped over her shoulder, not tucked in her purse. In her hand, ready, she walked straight to Daisy's kennel. She did not hesitate. She did not stop at the other kennels. She simply walked, slowly and steadily, until she stood before the chain-link gate. Daisy lifted her head. The woman knelt, and she smiled. "Are you ready, sweet girl?" she asked softly. Daisy's tail wagged. Just a little. Just enough, and for the first time in a very long time, the waiting felt like it might be over. The paperwork took longer than expected. Not because there were complications, not because anything was wrong, but because the woman whose name Daisy would later learn was Eleanor wanted to read everything carefully. Every line, every clause, every detail. She sat in the small office at the front of the shelter, her reading glasses perched on her nose, her finger tracing each sentence as she read. Ben sat across from her, patient and kind, answering her questions when she had them. "Will she need any medical care right away?" "No, ma'am. She's up to date on all her vaccinations. We did a checkup last month. Her hips are a little stiff, but that's normal for her age. The vet recommended joint supplements. We can give you the information." Eleanor nodded. She made a note in the margin of the paper. "And her diet? Is there anything specific?" "She does well on senior dog food. We've been giving her the kind with glucosamine. She eats twice a day, morning and evening. She's not picky." Eleanor nodded again. Another note. "Does she have any fears? Things that upset her?" Ben thought for a moment. "Loud noises sometimes. Thunder. Fireworks. She gets a little anxious. But she's never aggressive. She just hides. Finds a corner and waits it out." Eleanor's expression softened. "I understand that," she said quietly. She read through the rest of the paperwork in silence. Signed where she needed to sign. A Zinch where she needed to initial, and when she was finished, she folded her hands on the desk and looked at Ben. "I want to do this right," she said. "You will," Ben said. "I can tell." Eleanor smiled. It was a small smile, but it was real. And then it was done. The paperwork was filed, the fee was paid, the leash, the one Eleanor had brought from home, soft and worn and clearly loved by another dog in another life, was clipped to Daisy's collar. And for the first time in 4 months, Daisy walked out of her kennel. She moved slowly. Her legs were stiff from lying down so long, her paws uncertain on the smooth concrete floor. But Eleanor did not rush her. She simply held the leash loosely, letting Daisy set the pace, and walked beside her. They passed the other kennels. The dogs who were still waiting. Charlie, the old beagle, lifted his head and watched them go. Max, the 3-legged shepherd, wagged his tail from the back row. Mary was there, standing near the entrance. She smiled when she saw them, her eyes bright with something that might have been tears. "You take care of her," Mary said to Eleanor. "I will," Eleanor said. "And you take care of her," Mary said to Daisy, reaching down to scratch behind her ears one last time. Daisy leaned into her hand, just for a moment, and then she followed Eleanor through the double doors and out into the world. The sunlight was bright, too bright. Daisy blinked, her eyes adjusting after so many months of dim fluorescent lights and shadowed kennels. The air smelled different, fresher, fuller. There was grass somewhere nearby, trees, the faint scent of exhaust from the parking lot. Eleanor led her to an old sedan, pale blue and carefully maintained. She opened the back door and spread a blanket across the seat, the same pale blue blanket she had brought to the kennel weeks ago. "In you go," Eleanor said gently. Daisy hesitated. It had been a long time since she had been in a car. A long time since she had been anywhere but the shelter. But Eleanor waited, patient, kind, and slowly, carefully, Daisy climbed into the back seat and lay down on the blanket. Eleanor closed the door, got into the driver's seat, started the engine, and they drove. Daisy watched the world pass by through the window. Buildings, trees, people walking dogs on sidewalks, children playing in yards. The world was bigger than she remembered, brighter, fuller, but also quieter, because for the first time in a long time, the noise in her chest, the low, constant hum of waiting had gone still. The drive was not long. 20 minutes, maybe 30. Eleanor drove slowly, carefully, as if she had all the time in the world. And when they finally pulled into the driveway of a small house with white siding and a neat front yard, Eleanor turned off the engine and sat for a moment, her hands still on the wheel. "We're home," she said quietly. Home. Daisy did not know what that word meant anymore, but she followed Eleanor out of the car, down the driveway, up the steps to the front porch. And when Eleanor opened the door and gestured for her to come inside, Daisy stepped over the threshold and into the quiet, sunlit warmth of the house. It smelled like lavender and old books and something baking in the oven. It smelled like safety. Eleanor led her to the living room, where a dog bed, new, soft, the color of sage green, had been placed near the window. "This is yours," Eleanor said. Daisy sniffed it, circled it once, twice, and then, slowly, she lay down. The bed was soft, softer than the blanket in the kennel, softer than anything she had felt in a long time. Eleanor sat in the armchair nearby, her hands folded in her lap, watching Daisy with quiet contentment. "We'll take it slow," Eleanor said. "No rush, no expectations, just us, for however long we have." Daisy closed her eyes. The sunlight was warm on her fur. The house was quiet. Eleanor's breathing was steady and calm, and for the first time in a very long time, Daisy felt something close to peace. She did not know what would come next, did not know how long this would last, did not know if Eleanor would change her mind, if the house would become unfamiliar, if the waiting would begin again. But for now, for this moment, she was here. She was chosen. She was home, and that, she thought, was enough. The first night was the hardest. Not because Eleanor was unkind, not because the house was unfamiliar, though it was, but because Daisy had spent so many nights in the kennel, so many nights listening to the sounds of other dogs breathing, whimpering, shifting in their sleep, that the silence of the house felt almost too large. She lay on her new bed near the window, her eyes open, watching the shadows move across the ceiling as the evening deepened into night. Eleanor had left a nightlight on in the hallway, a small, warm glow that spilled into the living room, just enough to soften the darkness. "In case you need anything," Eleanor had said before she went upstairs to bed, "I'm just up there. Don't be afraid to come find me." But Daisy did not go upstairs. She stayed on her bed, her ears pricked, listening. The house settled around her. The hum of the refrigerator, the creak of old wood, the distant sound of a car passing on the street outside, and beneath it all, the steady, rhythmic sound of Eleanor's breathing from the room above. Daisy closed her eyes. She did not sleep right away. But eventually, slowly, the tension in her body began to ease. The unfamiliarity began to soften into something quieter. Something that, in time, might become comfort, and when she finally did sleep, it was deep and dreamless. The next morning, Eleanor woke early. Daisy heard her footsteps on the stairs, soft and deliberate, and lifted her head. Eleanor appeared in the doorway, still in her robe, her white hair loose around her shoulders. "Good morning, sweet girl," she said. Daisy's tail wagged, just a little. Eleanor smiled. "Let's get you some breakfast." The kitchen was small and bright, with yellow curtains and a window that looked out onto the backyard. Eleanor filled a bowl with kibble, the same kind Daisy had eaten at the shelter, and set it on the floor beside a bowl of fresh water. Daisy ate slowly, not because she was uncertain, but because she had learned over the long months of waiting that there was no need to rush. Food would come, water would come, and if it did not come immediately, it would come eventually. But here in Eleanor's kitchen, it came without waiting. And that was new. After breakfast, Eleanor opened the back door and gestured for Daisy to follow. The backyard was small, but well kept. A patch of grass, a few flowers along the fence, a wooden bench beneath a tree. Daisy stepped outside. The grass was cool beneath her paws. The air smelled of earth and morning dew and something green and alive. She walked slowly around the yard, sniffing, exploring, relearning what it meant to be outside without chain-link walls. Eleanor sat on the bench and watched her. "Take your time," she said, and Daisy did. The days that followed settled into a rhythm. Not the rigid, institutional rhythm of the shelter, but something gentler. Something shaped by comfort rather than routine. Morning meant breakfast in the kitchen, then time in the backyard while Eleanor drank her coffee on the bench. Midday meant rest. Daisy would lie on her bed near the window, the sunlight warm on her fur, while Eleanor read or knitted or moved quietly through the house. Afternoon meant a short walk, not far, just down the block and back. Eleanor moved slowly, and Daisy matched her pace. They did not rush. They simply walked, side by side, two old souls moving through the world together. Evening meant dinner. Then the soft glow of the television in the living room, Eleanor in her armchair, Daisy on her bed nearby. And night meant silence. The good kind. The kind that came with safety. But the turning point, the moment when Daisy truly understood that this was not temporary, that this was real, came on the 8th day. It was raining. Not a thunderstorm. Just a steady, quiet rain that pattered against the windows and filled the air with the smell of wet earth. Daisy had always been afraid of storms, the loud ones, with thunder that shook the walls and lightning that split the sky. But even the quiet rains made her uneasy, stirred something old and frightened in her chest. She lay on her bed, her ears back, her body tense. Eleanor noticed. She set down her book, stood slowly, and crossed the room. She knelt beside Daisy's bed carefully, with one hand braced on the floor for balance, and began to stroke Daisy's head. "It's all right," Eleanor said softly. "It's just rain, nothing to be afraid of." But Daisy's body did not relax. Eleanor thought for a moment. Then she stood, left the room, and returned with a blanket. Not the one from Daisy's bed, a different one, thick and soft and smelling faintly of lavender. She spread it over Daisy, tucking it gently around her body, covering her ears, her back, her trembling legs. There, Eleanor said, better. And it was. The weight of the blanket was comforting, grounding. It muffled the sound of the rain, softened the edges of the world. Daisy's breathing slowed. Her body relaxed. Eleanor sat beside her on the floor, her hand resting on Daisy's side, her voice low and steady. I used to be afraid of storms too, Eleanor said. When I was young, my mother would sit with me just like this. She'd tell me stories until the storm passed. She paused. Then quietly, she began to speak. Not a story, exactly. Just memories. Small, gentle things. About her mother. About the dog she'd had as a child. About the house she'd grown up in, with its creaky stairs and the oak tree in the backyard where she used to sit and read. She spoke until the rain softened, until Daisy's eyes grew heavy, until the fear dissolved into something quieter, and when Eleanor finally stood slowly, carefully, one hand on the armchair for support, Daisy did not stir. She was asleep, safe, warm, covered in a blanket that smelled like lavender and love, and Eleanor, looking down at her, smiled. "You're home now," she whispered, "and I'm not going anywhere." It was the truth. And somehow Daisy knew it. Daisy had been gone from the shelter for 2 weeks when Mary came to visit. Eleanor had mentioned it in passing, that the woman from the shelter, the one who had been kind to Daisy every Tuesday, wanted to stop by and see how she was settling in. Would that be all right? Eleanor had asked Daisy, as if the dog might answer. Daisy had simply wagged her tail. Mary arrived on a Saturday afternoon, carrying a small bag and wearing the same warm smile Daisy remembered. Eleanor greeted her at the door, and the two women embraced briefly, the way people do when they recognize kindness in each other. "Come in," Eleanor said. "She's in the living room." Mary stepped inside, and the moment she saw Daisy, her face softened. "Oh, sweet girl," she said, kneeling down, more easily than Eleanor, her knees younger and stronger and reaching out to scratch behind Daisy's ears. "Look at you. You look so good." And Daisy did. Her coat was shinier, her eyes brighter. The tension that had lived in her body for so long, the waiting, the uncertainty had begun to ease. She leaned into Mary's hand, her tail wagging steadily. "She's doing well," Eleanor said, standing in the doorway with her arms folded, watching them. "Better than I expected, honestly. I thought it might take longer for her to adjust." Mary smiled. "She knew," she said simply. "Dogs like Daisy, they know when they've found the right place." Eleanor nodded. She did not argue. Mary reached into her bag and pulled out a small package wrapped in brown paper. "I brought something," she said, "from the shelter, from all of us." Eleanor took the package, unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a framed photograph. It was Daisy, taken the day she had first arrived at the shelter. Her eyes were uncertain, her posture tense, her fur duller than it was now, but there was something in her expression, something quiet and enduring that had not changed. Beneath the photo, in careful handwriting, were the words, "Daisy, adopted, October 2025. She waited with dignity. She was chosen with love." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. She did not brush them away. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick. Mary smiled. "We don't often get to see the happy endings, but when we do, it matters." They sat together for a while, the three of them, Mary and Eleanor in the armchairs, Daisy on her bed nearby, the afternoon light spilling through the windows. They talked about the shelter, about the other dogs, about Charlie, the old beagle, who had finally been adopted by a retired veterinarian, about Max, the three-legged shepherd, who was still waiting but doing well. "He'll find someone," Mary said. "I know he will." Eleanor nodded. "I hope so." Mary looked at Daisy, her expression thoughtful. "You know," she said, "when you first came to the shelter, I wasn't sure you'd take her. You came so many times. I thought maybe you were talking yourself out of it." Eleanor smiled. "I was," she admitted. "I kept thinking, she's old. I'm old. What if I can't give her what she needs? What if I'm not enough? And what changed your mind?" Eleanor was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I realized it wasn't about being enough. It was about being there, for however long we have. Mary nodded. That's all any of us can do. They talked a while longer, and then Mary stood, gathered her bag, and hugged Eleanor goodbye. Take care of each other, she said. We will, Eleanor promised. And after Mary left, Eleanor sat in her armchair and looked at the framed photograph for a long time. Daisy, sensing something, stood slowly and crossed the room. She rested her head on Eleanor's knee. Eleanor stroked her gently, her fingers tracing the soft gray fur. You were so patient, Eleanor said quietly. Waiting all that time, I'm sorry it took so long. Daisy's tail wagged. Just a little. Eleanor smiled. But we're here now, and that's what matters. She set the photograph on the side table, where she could see it every day. A reminder. Not of where Daisy had been, but of how far she had come. And that evening, as the sun set and the house filled with the golden light of late afternoon, Eleanor and Daisy sat together in the living room. No television, no book, just the two of them in the quiet, steady presence of each other. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Because leaving the shelter had not just been about walking out the door, it had been about stepping into a life where she was wanted, where she was seen, where her age was not a burden, but simply part of who she was. And Eleanor, who had also learned what it meant to be overlooked, to grow old in a world that preferred youth, had given her that. Not with grand gestures, not with excitement or energy, but with patience, with kindness, with the quiet, steady commitment to show up day after day and simply be there. And Daisy, who had waited so long, had finally found the one thing she had been waiting for. Not a home, but a person who understood that home was not a place. It was a feeling. And she felt it now. The seasons changed slowly. Autumn deepened into winter. The mornings grew colder. The light grew thinner. The trees outside Eleanor's window lost their leaves, their branches bare and black against the pale sky. But inside the house, there was warmth. Daisy had learned the rhythms of her new life, the sound of Eleanor's footsteps on the stairs each morning, the clink of the coffee cup on the counter, the soft rustle of the newspaper being unfolded at the kitchen table. She had learned that Eleanor liked to sit by the window in the afternoons, a blanket over her lap, her hands busy with knitting needles that clicked together in a steady, soothing rhythm. She had learned that Eleanor talked to her, not in the high-pitched, baby talk way some people spoke to dogs, but in the same calm, thoughtful tone she might use with an old friend. I'm thinking of making soup today, Eleanor might say. What do you think? Maybe chicken? Or maybe vegetable? I'll see what I have. And Daisy would thump her tail against the floor, as if offering her opinion. Eleanor never expected an answer. She simply spoke, and Daisy simply listened, and that somehow was enough. The walks continued, even in the cold. Even when Eleanor's breath came out in clouds and her hands shook a little as she clipped the leash to Daisy's collar, they did not go far. Just down the block. Sometimes to the park at the end of the street, where Eleanor would sit on a bench and Daisy would lie at her feet, watching the world move past. Other doves came and went, young ones pulling on their leashes, barking at squirrels, full of energy and excitement. Their owners would smile at Eleanor, sometimes stop to chat. How old is she? They would ask, nodding at Daisy. 10 or 11, Eleanor would say. We're not entirely sure. She's beautiful. Thank you. I think so too. And they would move on, and Eleanor and Daisy would sit a while longer until the cold became too much and they would walk slowly home. Life was quiet, but it was full. Eleanor had her routines, and Daisy had become part of them. Morning coffee, afternoon knitting, evening television, the soft hum of the house settling into night. But there were new routines too, small things that had not existed before Daisy arrived. Eleanor had started baking again. Nothing elaborate, just simple things. Bread, cookies, a pie now and then, and Daisy would lie in the kitchen doorway, watching her work, the smell of butter and sugar filling the air. Eleanor had started talking on the phone more, to her daughter, who lived 2 states away, to old friends she had not spoken to in months. I got a dog, she would say. and there would be surprise in the voice on the other end. And Eleanor would laugh softly and say, "I know. I surprised myself too." And she would tell them about Daisy, about the shelter, about the waiting, about how she had almost talked herself out of it a dozen times, but had finally decided that being old was not a reason to stop living. And the voice on the other end would say things like, "Good for you," and "I'm glad." And Eleanor would smile and look at Daisy and think, "Yes, me too." There were hard days, of course, days when Eleanor's arthritis flared and she moved more slowly than usual, her face tight with pain. Days when Daisy's hips were stiff and she struggled to stand, and Eleanor would kneel beside her carefully, always carefully, and massage the joints with gentle hands until Daisy could move again. Days when the house felt too quiet, when the weight of age and time pressed down on both of them, and they simply sat together in the stillness, not needing to speak, just needing to be. But those days passed. They always did. And the good days, the ones filled with sunlight and warmth and the simple, steady comfort of each other's presence, those days outnumbered the hard ones. One afternoon in late November, Eleanor's daughter came to visit. Her name was Catherine. She was in her 40s, with kind eyes and her mother's soft smile. She brought groceries, helped with small repairs around the house, and sat in the living room with Eleanor, catching up on the weeks since they had last spoken. Daisy watched from her bed, uncertain at first. New people still made her cautious, but Catherine did not rush toward her, did not try to pet her immediately. She simply acknowledged Daisy with a nod and a quiet, "Hello, sweet girl," and left her alone. And after a while, Daisy relaxed. When Catherine left, she hugged her mother tightly. "I'm glad you have her," Catherine said. Eleanor nodded. "So am I. She's good for you. We're good for each other." Catherine smiled. "That's what I meant." And as she drove away, Eleanor stood on the porch with Daisy beside her, watching the car disappear down the street. "Just us again," Eleanor said. Daisy's tail wagged. Winter deepened. The days grew shorter, the nights longer. But inside the house, the warmth remained. Eleanor hung Christmas lights in the window, not many, just a simple string of white bulbs that glowed softly in the evenings. She baked gingerbread cookies and set a small plate aside for Catherine's visit on Christmas Day. She played old records, Frank Sinatra, Ella Fitzgerald, and hummed along as she moved through the house, Daisy following her from room to room. And on Christmas morning, when Catherine arrived with gifts and laughter and the smell of cinnamon rolls, Daisy lay beneath the tree, a small one, sat on a table in the corner and watched the two women talk and laugh and share a meal. And she thought, in the way dogs think, that this was what it meant to belong. Not to be needed for a purpose, not to perform or impress or earn her place, but simply to be there, to be part of the fabric of someone's life, to be woven into the routines, the rituals, the small, quiet moments that made up a day. She had waited so long for this, and now that she had it, she understood. It was not about being chosen quickly. It was not about being young or energetic or perfect. It was about being seen, being valued, being loved for exactly who she was. An old dog, with gray fur and stiff hips and a heart that had learned to wait with dignity. And Eleanor, who had also learned what it meant to be overlooked, to be told you were too old, too slow, too much of the past had given her that. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to, and that made all the difference. Spring came slowly. The snow melted. The trees began to bud. The mornings grew warmer, the light brighter, the air filled with the smell of earth waking up after a long sleep. Eleanor opened the windows. Fresh air filled the house, carrying with it the sounds of birds and distant lawnmowers and children playing in the street. Daisy stood at the back door, her nose pressed to the screen, breathing in the newness of it all. "Ready?" Eleanor asked, and together they stepped outside. The backyard had changed. The grass was greener. The flowers Eleanor had planted in the fall were beginning to bloom, small bursts of yellow and purple along the fence. Daisy walked slowly through the yard, sniffing, exploring, reacquainting herself with the world. Eleanor sat on the bench beneath the tree, her face turned toward the sun, her eyes closed. For a long time neither of them moved. They simply existed in the warmth, in the stillness, in the quiet joy of being alive. And then Eleanor spoke. "I was afraid, you know," she said softly, "when I first saw you. I was afraid of getting attached, afraid of losing you, afraid that it wouldn't be worth it." She opened her eyes, looked at Daisy. "But I was wrong." Daisy's tail wagged. "It's always worth it," Eleanor continued. "Even if it's hard, even if it doesn't last forever, because nothing does, and that's not a reason to stop trying." She paused. Then, quieter, "You taught me that." Daisy crossed the yard and lay down at Eleanor's feet, her head resting on the woman's shoe. Eleanor reached down and stroked her gently. "Thank you," she whispered. The weeks that followed were some of the best Daisy had ever known. The house was filled with light. The walks grew longer. Eleanor's daughter visited more often, sometimes bringing her own dog, a young golden retriever, who bounded through the yard while Daisy watched from the shade, content to let the young one have his energy. There were picnics in the backyard, quiet evenings on the porch, afternoons spent in the sun, doing nothing, needing nothing, simply being. And through it all, Eleanor and Daisy moved together, two old souls who had found each other at exactly the right time. Not when they were young and full of energy, not when the world expected them to be, but when they needed each other most. One evening, as the sun set and the sky turned gold and pink, Eleanor sat on the porch with a cup of tea, and Daisy lay beside her. The street was quiet. The air was warm. The world felt, for a moment, perfectly still. Eleanor looked at Daisy. "You know," she said, "people always talk about rescuing dogs, about saving them, but I think you saved me too." Daisy's ears twitched. "I was so lonely," Eleanor said, "before you. I didn't even realize how lonely. I thought I was fine, thought I was managing, but I wasn't. Not really." She sipped her tea. "And then you came along. And suddenly, I had a reason to get up in the morning, a reason to go outside, a reason to keep going." She set the cup down, reached over, and rested her hand on Daisy's head. "So thank you," she said, "for waiting, for being patient, for giving me a chance." Daisy leaned into her hand. And in that moment, quiet, simple, unremarkable to anyone passing by, something settled between them. A bond, a promise, a truth. They had saved each other. Not in a dramatic, cinematic way. Not with grand gestures or last-minute interventions. But slowly, quietly, over time, with patience, with kindness, with a simple, steady act of showing up, day after day, and choosing to love even when the world said it was too late. And now, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars began to appear, they sat together. Two old souls. Two lives that had been overlooked, undervalued, passed by, but not anymore, because they had found each other. And in finding each other, they had found something even more important. They had found home, not a place, not a building or a street or a town, but a feeling, the feeling of being needed, of being valued, of being loved for exactly who you are. And that, Daisy thought, as her eyes drifted closed and the warmth of the evening settled over her, was the most beautiful thing of all. Because she had waited so long, and the waiting had been worth it. Every single moment. Eleanor sat with her until the stars filled the sky, until the air grew cool, until Daisy's breathing deepened into sleep, and then gently she stood, covered Daisy with a blanket, and went inside. But she left the porch light on, just in case. Just so Daisy would know, even in sleep, that she was not alone, that she was home, and that she always would be. Some things are not chosen quickly. Some things take time. Some things require patience and faith, and the quiet belief that love is worth waiting for. This was a story about waiting, about dignity, about two souls who found each other when the world had stopped looking. And it was a story about rescue. Not the kind that happens in an instant, but the kind that happens slowly, gently, over time, the kind that saves not just one life, but two. If the story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more stories of hope, rescue, and the quiet power of love, because every dog deserves a chance. Every soul deserves to be seen, and every story, no matter how slow, deserves to be told. Thank you for listening, and remember, some of the most beautiful rescues happen long after everyone else has stopped looking.